What might be the most appropriate way to structure the board meeting? And what are the procedural routines that you should know about? In this video, we explore some common aspects of how board meetings may be structured and some of the pitfalls to watch out for. There is some flexibility when planning for a board meeting, and typically the chair and head of school will work together before the meeting to agree on the agenda and any particular strategies to manage the proceedings that may be required. Most board meetings follow a standard format, and the backbone for all meetings is the accompanying documentation. The agenda needs to be sent out to trustees several days before the meeting, along with all the relevant documents that include minutes of the previous meetings, reports, and supporting information for proposals or discussion items. Trustees need this information in advance so that they may be fully prepared before the board meeting, and no document should be issued for the first time during the meeting. The chair and head of school need to agree on the format and how the supporting documentation will be organized. Since virtually all documents are now sent electronically, it means that separate attachments need to have a file name convention that's identifiable with the agenda item, and could even be hyperlinked from the report to the file. It's an unnecessary annoyance to trustees when all the attachments are sent with seemingly random file names that were based on whoever authored the document itself. Instead, the board secretary or maybe the head of school could rename all of the attachments according to the agenda. So, for example, these attachments here require the trustees to figure out what report is referred to in the agenda. However, if these are renumbered or renamed like this, and the number corresponds to each agenda item, then it's easy to follow the order in which the reports are to be dealt with. While on the subject of agendas, it's useful to include a time allocation for each item. This allows everyone to mentally prepare for the meetings and ensure that it keeps pace. While it's not an exact science, the chair and head of school should be able to approximate how long is required for each item and therefore plan out the whole meeting. If the meeting looks as if it may be too long, then they may need to re-strategize to break up the content. Perhaps more importantly, the timing gives the board, and particularly the chair, the opportunity to control conversation that may drift. If an item has been scheduled for 5 minutes, and after 5 minutes there's still lively debate going on, then the chair has to gauge whether the issue may be resolved quickly, in which case overrunning a minute or two may be worthwhile, or if there doesn't seem to be an end in sight, then this may need to be an issue that has to be pushed back to a committee or rescheduled for a further board discussion with an appropriate time frame. The other thing that's useful to identify on the agenda is whether the item is for information, for approval, or for discussion. When you think about the three modes of governance, the for information agenda items are intended to keep all trustees updated with the relevant facts as part of the board's fiduciary or oversight functions. Those issues that are for approval tend to have a longer-term impact on the school, whether financial or policy related. So these approvals are part of the strategic thinking of the board or their foresight mode. Those items slated for discussion tend to be opportunities for trustees to frame the situation, to better understand what's going on, and to share ideas that help shape the future thinking for the head of school and for the board. These insights fall under the generative mode of governance. It's a good idea for the chair and head of school to reflect on these modes of governance and understand those items that are task-related, such as approving a revision to the school's language policy, and those elements that are more of a process. In this example, it may be necessary to ensure that all trustees understand and accept why the language policy needs to be changed the way it has. These two distinctions can be helpful in shaping the discussions and successful outcomes from these meetings. The board meetings are crucial in the school's success, since they are a funnel and filter for information and recommendations to the board, and equally provides the leadership and management with direction and authority. Being able to bring clarity to the work of the board over the course of a year and to drive initiatives forward requires plans and people, and the board meetings are where these come together. Moving from agendas to minutes. First, it's good to get the minutes circulated as quickly as possible following the meeting. This allows trustees to read and reflect on the minutes while they're still fresh in their mind, but also serves as a reminder about any action items that had been identified. The minutes can only be formally approved at the next board meeting, but suggestions or typos can be spotted immediately so that they can be corrected in advance, which means that the next meeting can focus on the main discussion items rather than banal changes to punctuation or grammar. The minutes shouldn't be a long blow-by-blow detailed account of who said what, but rather a succinct summary of the decisions and action points. Whomever's tasked with taking the minutes may need to be guided on effective minutes, and if there's a non-board secretary, then he or she may need to be coached on how to ask for clarification. So, for example, it's not uncommon during a meeting that numerous trustees put ideas and suggestions, and before long, there may have been a general consensus about a topic, but the exact wording of the proposal has become blurred or confused. The secretary therefore needs to be empowered to ask the group for someone to explicitly state what the proposal is. In this way, the exact wording can be captured along with the person proposing it and the person seconding the motion before it's put to a vote. These are details that are important to be captured in the minutes. When it comes to reviewing the minutes from the previous meeting, as has already been alluded to, it's unnecessary to spend valuable time on approving the minutes as long as trustees have had sufficient time to review and comment on the draft minutes before the meeting. If the initial draft minutes are circulated, say, within 5 days of the board meeting, and any suggestions or changes are taken on board and the revised minutes circulated with the agenda, then approving the minutes and signing them off should be a very quick process, allowing more time for discussing the action points or matters arising from the minutes. Trustee time obviously is precious, and meeting time even more so. For this reason, it's a good idea to bundle all the information-style reports that are shared in advance. There may be action items from previous meetings that need updates on, for example, information about student enrollment or the recent art exhibition. But these items, they're not controversial and don't need discussion per se, so they shouldn't take up precious time during the meeting. Trustees can be encouraged to reach out to the head of school or appropriate person to ask any trivial or clarifying questions in advance of the meeting, so that during the board meeting, all of these reports can be accepted with little or no discussion. Sometimes this is referred to as a consent agenda, and this approach ensures that trustee time is focused on the strategic discussions and important matters of policy. However, it does require the diligent work of the trustees to ensure that they've actually read the reports and are not simply turning up to board meetings unprepared. When the chair and head of school have thoughtfully prepared the agenda, an efficient board can therefore cover much of the straightforward procedural and informational material in short time, which then carves out more time for the more impactful discussions and deliberations of the board. If there are topics that require in-depth discussion, or are perhaps sensitive, then it's usually good to get into these while the trustees are still fresh, rather than at the end of a long meeting. Those issues that require approval should have been thrashed out in advance of the meeting through the appropriate committee or task force, so the role of the board is to reflect on a summary and the proposals that are submitted. The board meeting is a time for trustees to ask questions and to be assured that the background work has been thoroughly done, and then to agree or otherwise on the proposal. Some boards work towards this idea of a consensus where all trustees have the opportunity to express their opinions, and if there's a general consensus, that's accepted. Others, as I've mentioned, put the proposal or the motion to a vote, and that's still an option even for the more collegiate consensus-based approach, if a dissenting trustee wants to get a definitive position. As said, it's helpful in the short term when preparing to approve a proposal if the wording is concise and unambiguous, and this is equally important in the long term when the school's leadership is implementing those decisions. If there's a discussion or a difference of opinion on the proposal, that may indicate that the committee needs to go back and conduct more research or present their findings in a different way, and that no further time should be wasted for the whole board at that stage. On the other hand, particularly contentious issues often have lively debate, and eventually a decision has to be taken. If this is the case, it's a good idea to remind all the trustees that their different opinions are valued in the meetings, but once a decision has been taken by the board, then every trustee is expected to support that decision publicly. In most cases where a vote is required, a simple majority would be sufficient. Usually the chair would refrain from voting and would only cast a deciding vote in the case of an even distribution of votes cast. In some cases, a unanimous vote may be required or desired, since that would send a very strong message. So, for example, imagine a situation where you're appointing a new head of school and you've decided on a candidate, say an internal candidate. What message would it send to the candidate if they were told it was not a unanimous decision? Now, while it's important to assume the good intentions of everyone on the board, nevertheless, everyone also has to appreciate that even the best intentions can be undone unless there are protocols in place to control them. So, for example, most people would agree that they want board meetings not to run on endlessly into the early hours of the morning. But in order to control that, there needs to be mechanisms such as the timing of the agenda items to limit conversation or redirect to working committees. Equally, it can be counterproductive and undermining of the work of the board for items to be introduced into the meeting that are not part of the agenda. Just as documents shouldn't be presented in board meetings that haven't been previously circulated, so too trustees need to be mindful that they're not introducing discussion points that are not part of the agenda. While it's ultimately the role of the chair to refocus the group back onto the agenda, all trustees have the right to question how a comment or issue is relevant to the matters on the agenda to help keep the board's work focused. When boards get sidetracked into discussions that were not on the agenda, it seems obvious that the meetings can overrun, and trustees become frustrated by the chaos and poor decision-making that results from them. Equally, there's nothing saying that the meeting should end with any other business. If you allow an AOB on the agenda, then this gives the open floor to any issue that can suck whatever life is left in the trustees at the end of the meeting. The AOB issues that are thrust on the board with no time to reflect, no supporting documentation, and may well be biased or contentious, it's not really a great way to finish a meeting. How long should meetings last and how frequently should boards meet? Well, these are questions, of course, only you can answer. But if you ask me, I would say that a regular board meeting that goes on for more than 2.5 hours is probably lost its impact. Given that most board meetings are taking place at the end of the workday, most people are tired by that time, and while meetings can easily run on until late, that doesn't make them effective. And in terms of frequency, it's not uncommon for boards to meet monthly, but this can become quite arduous when there are commitments for committees to factor in. So arguably a more effective way to structure the work of the board is to allow time for the committees to meet and really do their important work, let's say 1 month, and the following month to hold the board meeting. Finally, there are some schools that have open sessions that are available to parents or for staff to attend. Not all schools have this built in, and even those that do, the jury's still out on the best way to manage them. Some boards operate completely openly and only refer legal or personnel issues to a closed session, while others may opt to have a short session at the start of the meeting which is open to stakeholders that covers, say, informational reporting, and then reverts to a working board session where spectators are excluded. Generally speaking, where there are procedures in place with open sessions for parents to attend, then these should be honoured. Otherwise, there may be an impression that somehow the board has something to hide when they work in secret sessions. And this is why closed sessions may be phrased rather than a closed session, but maybe a working session, since most people can appreciate the need for the board to get on and do the work that they're there to do. Of course, the board needs to have systems in place, depending on the style of the board, to publish minutes and agendas to the stakeholders, whether this is available online, for example, or through a hard copy in the school's library. So what elements of your board meetings do you think could be made more effective? Are there structures or agreements that need to be in place to help the board's work be more efficient?